My name is Jake, and it all started on September 7th, 2022. That evening, the last bell had rung, but I stayed behind to finish a project in the art room. The halls of the school were eerily quiet, the dim lights casting long shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. As I packed up my supplies, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. While heading towards the exit, I encountered Mr. Thompson, the school's night guard. He was an older man with a stern expression, always carrying a flashlight. "Jake, you shouldn't be here this late," he said, his voice carrying an edge of urgency. "Never stay after the last bell. It's not safe." I shrugged off his warning, attributing it to an overactive imagination fueled by ghost stories. But something in his eyes unsettled me, a flicker of genuine fear. I nodded, assuring him I was leaving, but my curiosity was piqued. What could possibly happen in an empty school? Walking down the hallway, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. The creak of floorboards and distant echoes of my footsteps sent chills down my spine. As I passed by the science lab, I saw a shadow flicker in my peripheral vision. I turned sharply, but there was nothing there, just the dimly lit corridor stretching endlessly. Reaching the main entrance, I glanced back one last time. The school was still, yet alive with an unseen presence. Mr. Thompson's words echoed in my mind. "Never stay after the last bell." I dismissed it again, pushing the door open and stepping into the cool night air. But as I walked home, the unease lingered, like an itch I couldn't scratch. The mystery of the school at night had hooked me, and I knew I would return. The next evening, despite Mr. Thompson's warning, I stayed after the last bell again. This time, I had a clear purpose: to uncover whatever secrets the school held. As the final echoes of students' chatter faded, the eerie silence took over. I sat in the library, pretending to read, while my mind raced with possibilities. Minutes turned into hours, and soon I found myself alone. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building. As I made my way through the deserted hallways, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every corner a hidden threat. In the quiet, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the direction of the auditorium. My heart pounded as I crept closer, the sound growing louder. Pushing the door open, I found the room empty. Rows of seats stared back at me, and the stage was shrouded in darkness. I scanned the area, my senses heightened, but there was nothing unusual. Just as I was about to leave, a cold breeze brushed past me, sending a shiver down my spine. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I felt a presence. Turning slowly, I saw a shadow move across the stage. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. The rational part of my mind told me it was just my imagination, but the unease was hard to ignore. Determined to find out what was going on, I decided to explore the basement, a place most students avoided. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended into the darkness. The air grew colder, and the faint smell of damp and mildew filled my nostrils. Reaching the bottom, I flicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. In the basement, old furniture and forgotten equipment were scattered about. As I moved deeper, the feeling of being watched intensified. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the space, making me jump. I swung the flashlight around, its beam landing on an old wooden door. It was slightly ajar, and the darkness beyond seemed to beckon me. With a deep breath, I pushed the wooden door open. The hinges creaked, and the door revealed a narrow staircase leading further down. Each step echoed in the confined space, amplifying my unease. The air grew colder, and a musty smell intensified as I descended. The flashlight's beam wavered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, cluttered room. Old documents and boxes were piled high, and broken furniture lay scattered across the floor. Among the debris, something caught my eye. A dusty old diary, its cover worn and faded. Picking it up, I carefully opened the fragile pages, my hands trembling with anticipation. The diary belonged to a former janitor named Harold, who had worked at the school decades ago. His entries detailed strange occurrences and unsettling encounters he experienced while working late at night. Harold wrote about a mysterious presence that seemed to haunt the school, watching him from the shadows. His words sent chills down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone in my experiences. As I read further, I discovered Harold had tried to uncover the source of the disturbances. He believed the presence was connected to a tragic event involving a student who disappeared in the 1970s. Harold's last entry was particularly chilling. He mentioned finding a hidden room in the basement, but he didn't have the courage to explore it alone. Determined to continue where Harold left off, I decided to find the hidden room. The diary hinted it was somewhere nearby. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a sudden rush of cold air, as if someone or something was watching me. The sense of dread was overwhelming, but my curiosity pushed me forward. Moving carefully, I began searching the walls for any signs of a hidden entrance. After what felt like an eternity, I noticed a slight crack in the wall behind an old bookshelf. With some effort, I managed to move the heavy piece of furniture, revealing a small, concealed door. My heart raced as I reached for the handle, the anticipation and fear almost too much to bear. With a trembling hand, I turned the handle and pushed the concealed door open. The hinges groaned, revealing a dark, narrow passage. The air was colder here, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I stepped inside, the flashlight casting long shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. The passage led to a small room, sparsely furnished with an old desk and a chair. On the desk, there were more old documents and a photograph. The photo was of a young boy, probably around my age, standing in front of the school. Flipping it over, I saw a name scribbled on the back, Timothy, 1972. My heart sank as I realized this was the missing student Harold had mentioned in his diary. The mystery deepened, and I felt a surge of determination to uncover the truth. As I continued to search the room, I found more clues about Timothy. He had been a curious student, much like me, who had stayed after school hours to work on a project. According to the documents, Timothy had disappeared without a trace one night, and his case remained unsolved. The more I read, the stronger the connection I felt to him, as if his spirit was guiding me. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper, almost like a plea for help. I turned sharply, but the room was empty. The whispering grew louder, leading me to a corner of the room where an old, dusty book lay partially hidden. Picking it up, I realized it was Timothy's journal. His entries mirrored Harold's, describing strange sightings and eerie feelings of being watched. Timothy's last entry was heart-wrenching. He wrote about discovering a hidden room and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread as he approached it. His final words were a plea for anyone who found his journal to help him. I felt a chill run down my spine, realizing I was standing in the same room Timothy had described. The weight of his words pressed heavily on me. As I closed the journal, I felt a presence behind me. Turning slowly, I saw a faint outline of a figure, almost like a shadow, standing in the doorway. It was Timothy. His eyes, filled with sorrow, met mine. I understood then that he had been trapped here all these years, waiting for someone to uncover the truth and set him free. Summoning all my courage, I reached out, hoping to bring him peace. My heart pounded as I reached out to Timothy's ghostly figure. The air grew colder, and my breath formed a mist in the dim light. Timothy's eyes, filled with a deep sorrow, seemed to plead for help. "I'm here to help you," I whispered, though my voice trembled with fear. The ghostly figure moved closer, and I felt a surge of determination to free him from his torment. Timothy's presence guided me to the old desk. There, I found a hidden compartment containing an ancient-looking key. Timothy pointed towards another door at the far end of the room, one I hadn't noticed before. With the key in hand, I approached the door, the sense of urgency growing stronger. The key fit perfectly, and the door creaked open, revealing another dark passage. As I stepped into the passage, Timothy's figure followed me, his presence growing stronger. The passage led to a small hidden chamber. Inside, there were old dusty artifacts and a strange glowing box. I felt an inexplicable pull towards the box, as if it held the answer to Timothy's plight. I opened it carefully, revealing a small, ornate amulet. The moment I touched it, a warmth spread through the room, and Timothy's figure began to glow brighter. Timothy's ghost smiled for the first time, a look of relief washing over his face. The amulet was the key to freeing him from his eternal torment. I held it up, and the room filled with a bright light. Timothy's form became more solid, and I could see the gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice now clear and strong. The light grew even brighter, enveloping us both. When the light faded, Timothy was gone. The oppressive coldness that had filled the room was replaced with a comforting warmth. I knew that Timothy had finally found peace. I carefully placed the amulet back in the box and left the hidden chamber, feeling a sense of closure. As I ascended the stairs back to the main school building, the feeling of being watched was gone. The school no longer felt eerie. It felt like a place of learning and growth once more. Returning to the main hallway, I saw Mr. Thompson waiting for me. He gave me a knowing nod, as if he understood everything that had transpired. "You did good, Jake," he said, his voice filled with respect. "Now you understand why you should never stay after the last bell." I nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. I promised myself never to ignore his warnings again, grateful for the experience that had not only freed Timothy, but also strengthened my own resolve. My name is Emily, and it all started on the evening of March 11th, 2024. The last bell had rung, but I decided to stay behind to study for an upcoming exam. The school was eerily quiet, the long corridors dimly lit and filled with shadows. The library, my usual study spot, felt colder and more oppressive than usual. I shrugged off the unease, focusing on my notes. As the hours passed, the silence became more pronounced. The sound of the wind outside and the occasional creak of the building were the only interruptions. Immersed in my books, I barely noticed the time. Suddenly, a soft rustling sound broke my concentration. I looked up but the library was empty. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the old archives section. Ignoring the growing sense of dread, I decided to investigate. The archives were a part of the library students rarely visited. Dusty shelves lined the walls, filled with old documents and forgotten books. As I moved deeper into the archives, the rustling sound grew louder. My heart pounded as I turned a corner and saw an old book lying open on a table, its pages fluttering despite the lack of wind. Curiosity overcame my fear. I approached the book and saw that it was a diary. The handwriting was neat, but the ink was faded. The entries dated back to the early 1980s, written by a student named Sarah. Her words spoke of strange occurrences and ghostly whispers she heard while staying late at school. As I read, a chill ran down my spine. The descriptions matched my own experiences, and I felt an eerie connection to Sarah. Lost in the diary, I didn't notice the time passing. Suddenly, a shadow moved in my peripheral vision. I looked up, heart racing, but saw nothing. The library was silent again, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I quickly gathered my things, deciding it was time to leave. As I hurried towards the exit, I heard a voice, soft, almost a whisper, calling my name. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the dark corners of the library. The whispering voice calling my name sent chills down my spine. Emily, it said, so faint it could have been the wind, but unmistakably clear. I felt a surge of fear and curiosity. I knew I should leave, but something compelled me to stay. Against my better judgment, I followed the voice deeper into the library, towards the back where the light was dimmest. As I approached the darkened area, the whisper grew louder, more insistent. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned a corner and found myself face to face with Mr. Thompson, the night guard. He looked at me with concern etched across his face. "Emily, you shouldn't be here this late," he said, his voice stern but caring. "It's not safe. Go home." I nodded, but before I could explain, the whispering voice interrupted again, this time more urgent. "Help us, Emily." Mr. Thompson's eyes widened, and he grabbed my arm, leading me quickly towards the exit. "Who is calling me?" I asked, pulling away from his grasp. Mr. Thompson hesitated, his eyes filled with a mix of fear and sadness. "The voices you hear are from those who never left," he said quietly. "They are trapped here, reliving their final moments. You can't help them. Please, go home." His words sent a wave of dread through me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to uncover the truth. Determined, I returned to the diary of Sarah. Her final entries were filled with despair and fear. She wrote about the whispers growing louder, leading her to places in the school she had never been. Her last entry mentioned a hidden room in the basement where the voices seemed to converge. She believed that solving the mystery of that room would free the trapped souls. I knew I had to find that room. Ignoring Mr. Thompson's warnings, I made my way to the basement. The staircase leading down was old and creaky, the air growing colder with each step. As I descended, the whispering voices became a chorus, all calling my name. The basement was a maze of old storage rooms and forgotten equipment. I followed the voices to a door at the far end, partially hidden behind a stack of old chairs. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was small and filled with an oppressive darkness. In the center was an old wooden table, and on it, a single, flickering candle. The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. My heart raced as I approached the table, knowing that whatever I found here would change everything. The silence in the small room was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. The candle flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I approached the table, my hands trembling. On the table lay an old book, its cover worn and cracked. The title was barely legible, but it looked like a journal. I reached out and opened it, my eyes scanning the yellowed pages. The journal belonged to a former student named Michael, who had attended the school in the early 1980s. His entries mirrored Sarah's, detailing strange occurrences and whispering voices. Michael had also discovered the hidden room and believed it was the key to solving the mystery. As I read, I felt a deep connection to him, as if his words were guiding me. Michael's final entry was chilling. He described a night when the voices had led him to the hidden room, just as they had led me. He wrote about a sense of overwhelming dread and the feeling of being watched. His last words were a desperate plea for help, as if he knew he wouldn't make it out alive. My heart pounded as I realized that Michael, like Sarah, had disappeared without a trace. Suddenly, the candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing the shadowy corners of the room. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, filling my mind with a cacophony of voices all begging for help. The fear was almost unbearable, but I forced myself to stay calm. In the dim light of the flashlight, I saw a faint outline of a door on the far wall. It was barely noticeable, hidden behind layers of dust and grime. My heart raced as I approached it, the whispers growing louder with each step. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow passage that seemed to stretch on forever. I stepped into the passage, the air growing colder and more oppressive. The whispers were deafening now, a chorus of voices all pleading for release. The passage led to another small room, this one filled with old, dusty furniture and more forgotten artifacts. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its surface covered in a thick layer of dust. As I approached the mirror, the whispers reached a fever pitch. I felt a sense of urgency, as if the trapped souls were begging me to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. With a deep breath, I wiped the dust from the mirror, revealing my reflection. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the image in the mirror began to change, revealing the faces of the trapped souls, all staring back at me with desperate eyes. The faces in the mirror stared back at me, their eyes filled with desperation and sorrow. Each face seemed to plead for help, their whispers echoing in my mind. My reflection was barely visible, overshadowed by the ghostly apparitions. The air grew colder, and a sense of urgency washed over me. I knew I had to do something to help them. I reached out to touch the mirror, but my hand passed through it as if it were made of water. A chill ran down my spine as my fingers brushed against something solid on the other side. I pulled back, feeling the weight of the trapped souls pressing down on me. Their whispers grew louder, more frantic, urging me to find a way to free them. Desperate to help, I turned back to Michael's journal, hoping for a clue. His final entries mentioned a ritual that might release the souls, a ritual that involved using the mirror as a portal. He had written about finding a hidden amulet that could break the curse. My heart pounded as I realized the amulet I had found in the hidden room might be the key. With trembling hands, I pulled the amulet from my pocket and held it up to the mirror. The faces in the glass seemed to react, their expressions shifting from despair to hope. The whispers intensified, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. I closed my eyes and focused on Michael's instructions, reciting the words he had written in his journal. As I spoke the incantation, the mirror began to glow, a bright light emanating from its surface. The faces of the trapped souls grew clearer, their expressions softening. The air crackled with energy, and I felt a surge of power coursing through me. The light grew brighter, enveloping the room in a blinding radiance. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger with each word. Suddenly, the light exploded outward, filling the room with a brilliant flash. When the light faded, the mirror was shattered, its pieces scattered across the floor. The oppressive coldness that had filled the room was gone, replaced by a comforting warmth. The whispers had ceased, and the faces of the trapped souls were nowhere to be seen. I felt a sense of peace, knowing they had finally found rest. I took a deep breath and looked around the room, feeling a sense of accomplishment and relief. The ordeal had been terrifying, but I had succeeded in freeing the trapped souls. I gathered the pieces of the mirror, feeling a connection to the spirits I had helped. As I made my way back up the passage, I knew I would never forget the faces in the mirror and the whispers that had led me to them. Reaching the main hallway, I saw Mr. Thompson waiting for me. He gave me a knowing nod, his eyes filled with respect and gratitude. "You did well, Emily," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "You've brought peace to those who needed it most." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. I promised myself to never ignore his warnings again, and to always listen to the voices that needed help. As I ascended the stairs, back to the main school building, the sense of peace grew stronger. The whispers had stopped, and the air was no longer cold and oppressive. I felt a warmth in my heart, knowing I had freed the trapped souls. When I reached the top, Mr. Thompson was still there, his expression softening as he saw me. "You did what needed to be done," he said quietly. "But remember, Emily, not everyone who stays after the last bell is as lucky." His words carried a weight of experience and warning. I nodded, understanding the gravity of what had transpired. The school's dark history had left its mark on me, but I had made a difference. The next day, I returned to school, feeling a strange mix of normalcy and change. The hallways were bustling with students, the usual noise and chaos of a school day, but I noticed subtle differences. The air seemed lighter, the shadows less foreboding. The library, once a place of whispers and fear, now felt like a sanctuary. I couldn't help but think about Michael, Sarah, and the others who had been trapped. Their faces haunted my thoughts, but not in a frightening way. They were reminders of the courage it took to face the unknown and the importance of helping those in need. As I walked through the school, I felt a sense of connection to them, a bond forged through shared experience. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night slowly faded, but the lessons remained. I became more aware of the people around me, more attuned to their unspoken fears and hidden struggles. I made a point to reach out, to listen, and to help whenever I could. The school was no longer just a place of learning. It was a place of healing and hope. One evening, as I was packing up to leave, I saw Mr. Thompson in the hallway. He gave me a knowing smile and a nod. "Leaving on time?" he asked, a hint of humor in his voice. I smiled back, feeling a warmth in my heart. "Yes, Mr. Thompson," I replied. "No more staying after the last bell." His smile widened, and he gave me a thumbs up before continuing his rounds. As I walked home, I felt a sense of closure. The school, once filled with echoes of the past, was now a place of promise for the future. I knew I would never forget the faces in the mirror, but I also knew I had made a difference. The experience had changed me, made me stronger and more compassionate. I had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, ready to help others do the same. My name is Max, and on June 19th, 2024, curiosity got the best of me. The last bell had rung, but I decided to stay behind to explore the school after hours. The empty hallways had a different atmosphere at night. Quiet, almost like they were holding their breath. As I wandered, the dim lights cast long shadows, and the usual vibrant school seemed a world apart. The first sign that something was off came when I reached the gym. The doors were slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through. Pushing the doors open, I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing the light from the hallway. The gym was silent except for the occasional creak of the wooden floor. I walked across the room, my footsteps echoing eerily. As I made my way to the bleachers, I felt an unsettling sensation, like I was being watched. I stopped and scanned the room, but there was nothing there. Shaking off the feeling, I climbed the bleachers and sat down, the silence pressing in on me. That's when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible rustling sound coming from the back of the gym. My heart pounded as I stood up and walked towards the source of the sound. The rustling grew louder, more distinct. I reached the equipment room door, which was slightly open. Peering inside, I saw shadows moving, but couldn't make out anything specific. The sense of being watched intensified, and a chill ran down my spine. I hesitated, debating whether to investigate further. Summoning my courage, I stepped into the equipment room. The smell of old leather and dust filled the air. I scanned the room with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. Suddenly, something darted past the edge of the light, disappearing into the shadows. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I wasn't alone. Moving cautiously, I followed the shadow, my flashlight flickering. The rustling continued, leading me to a corner where old mats and gym equipment were piled high. The feeling of being watched was almost unbearable now. I reached out to move one of the mats, and as I did, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A faint outline, barely visible, but unmistakably human. The figure in the shadows was barely visible, more like a distortion in the air than a solid form. My heart raced as I stared at it, frozen in place. The room felt colder, and the air was heavy with an eerie silence. The figure moved slightly, and I felt a rush of fear mixed with curiosity. I knew I should leave, but something compelled me to stay. I took a cautious step forward, my flashlight beam wavering. The figure seemed to retreat into the shadows, and the rustling sound grew louder. I followed, my breath coming in shallow gasps. As I rounded a stack of old gym equipment, the figure disappeared through a small door at the back of the room. The door was slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the crack. Pushing the door open, I found myself at the base of a narrow staircase leading up to the attic. The air was musty and thick with dust. I hesitated for a moment, then began to climb, each step creaking under my weight. The sense of being watched grew stronger with every step. and the darkness seemed to close in around me. Reaching the top, I stepped into the attic. The space was cluttered with old furniture and forgotten school supplies. Dust particles floated in the air, illuminated by the beam of my flashlight. The figure was nowhere to be seen, but the feeling of its presence was overwhelming. I moved cautiously through the attic, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. As I explored, I found an old, dusty trunk in the corner. The lock was broken, and the lid was slightly open. My curiosity piqued. I lifted the lid and peered inside. The trunk was filled with old photos, notebooks, and letters. I picked up a photograph and saw a group of students standing in front of the school, their faces smiling and full of life. Flipping it over, I saw a date. June 1974. I rifled through the trunk, finding more photos and documents. Each one told a story of a student who had attended the school decades ago. The letters were filled with accounts of strange occurrences and unexplained events, much like what I was experiencing. My heart pounded as I realized the figure might be one of these students, trapped in the school for all these years. Suddenly, a cold breeze swept through the attic, and I felt the figure's presence behind me. I turned slowly, my flashlight illuminating the empty space. The figure appeared again, more distinct this time, its outline clearer but still ghostly. It raised a hand, pointing towards a small window at the far end of the attic. My heart raced as I realized it wanted me to look outside. My heart pounded as I approached the small window at the far end of the attic. The figure's presence loomed behind me, urging me forward. The window was dirty and covered in cobwebs, but I could make out the faint outlines of the school grounds below. I wiped away the grime with my sleeve, and a clearer view emerged. The schoolyard was bathed in the pale glow of the moonlight, casting long shadows that seemed to dance across the ground. At first, everything looked normal, but then I noticed something odd. Near the old oak tree, there was a faint, shimmering light, almost like a will-o'-the-wisp. It moved slowly, as if beckoning me. I turned to the figure, but it had vanished again. The sense of urgency, however, remained. I knew I had to investigate the light outside. Descending the narrow staircase, I made my way through the silent school, the corridors now feeling even more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside heightened my anxiety. As I stepped out into the cool night air, the shimmering light near the oak tree became clearer. It seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, drawing me closer. The school grounds were eerily silent, and my footsteps sounded unnaturally loud as I walked towards the tree. The light grew brighter, casting an eerie glow on the surroundings. Reaching the tree, I saw that the light was emanating from a small, hidden compartment in the tree's trunk. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, I opened the compartment and found an old, ornate box inside. The box was intricately designed, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse with the same energy as the light. My hands trembled as I opened the box. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs and letters, much like those in the attic. One photograph caught my eye. It was a picture of a student standing in front of the school, the same ghostly figure I had seen. The letter accompanying the photo was addressed to the student's parents, dated June 1974. It spoke of the student's disappearance and the strange occurrences at the school. As I read the letter, the figure appeared beside me once more, its presence less frightening and more sorrowful. I realized it was the spirit of the missing student, trapped between worlds. The light from the box pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I felt a deep connection to the spirit. The figure raised its hand, pointing towards the school, urging me to understand its message. The realization hit me like a wave. The student had been trying to communicate, to tell their story, and find peace. I knew what I had to do. Gathering the photographs and letters, I made my way back to the school. The spirit followed, its presence a constant reminder of the task at hand. I needed to share the student's story, to bring light to the mystery that had shrouded the school for so long.